5, wait 1 second, pause. It doesn't say, okay, right, here we go again, couldn't find the button, I'm sorry. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome. We'd like to thank everyone with Florida Peninsula joining us today. My name is Joseph Carrier with Excel and Access, and I'm here with Christopher Fennell and Dennis Taylor. Dennis Taylor will be your presenter and trainer today. And the presentation will be tailored to Excel 2010, which we believe you're all working with. If you're working with Excel 2013, feel free to try any of this out, because the best thing is always to learn by doing. Dennis Taylor has over 25 years of computer software teaching experience throughout the U.S. and Canada. In addition to being the author-presenter of over 400 webinars on various Excel topics since 2006, he has also authored or co-authored 6 books on spreadsheet software. Dennis has taught over 500 public Excel seminars and thousands of Excel classes and workshops. He has also been the author-presenter of numerous Excel video DVD courses since the mid-1990s and has over 80 hours of online Excel training, which is available at www.lynda, that's lynda.com/Dennis Taylor. And with that, Dennis, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Joe, and hello, everyone. I would imagine that some of you who are watching today have worked with Excel a little bit, maybe some of you not very much at all. Let's face it, when you first open Excel, if you don't have much guidance, it can be pretty intimidating. A lot of people get started with Excel by the fact that they are given a worksheet or a workbook and simply make some data entry changes to it. In today's session, what we're going to be doing is, at least initially, creating something kind of small in Excel, a small worksheet, getting familiar with some of the terminology, and then sort of shifting gears a little bit, giving you some of the techniques, the methods, helping you. We want to help you understand the screen and all those many, many buttons that appear up there, and give you some good broad overview of what Excel is all about. And then we'll switch to an actual file that has a number of different worksheets in it and give you a certain sense of what Excel can be used for. Some people use it to maintain large lists of data. Perhaps some of you are already doing that. And the idea of what you do with the data, sorting it, filtering it, we'll give you a little bit of insight into those features. We'll also show you something about charts. A lot of people call them graphs, same thing. And we'll also, along the way, give you lots of shortcuts and techniques. Let's first look at the screen that you see when you open Excel. You'll notice at the top, and there might be something slightly different here on your screen if you had just started Excel, you'll see the term, usually it says Book 1. It is a reminder, too, that in Excel, a file is a workbook is a file. The terms are synonymous. When you start Excel, typically what you're confronted with is an empty workbook. Now, different versions of Excel start a little bit differently, but most of them present you with this sort of, you might say, an empty screen. Not really empty, but a workbook with nothing in it. At the very bottom of this, you're likely to see 3 different sheets. Now, you'll learn later, and some of you may know already, a workbook contains at least one worksheet, possibly many, and at first the idea of why would you need more than one or why do we have more than one isn't so obvious, but let's say that a lot of people keep data together in a single file, that's a workbook, with a different sheet maybe for each month of the year. Or maybe they work in a company that has sales in different states, so they might have a different sheet for each state. Other people might be tracking data by quarter or by year. There are any number of different reasons for wanting to have different worksheets. We're going to focus primarily on the idea that most of the time you want to work, or at least as we get started, work with a single worksheet. Now, what can be intimidating is the menu system in Excel, and particularly if you start clicking the different tabs. And let's get a little bit of terminology straight. I don't want to overpower you or burden you with terminology, but a few terms we will see and use often. One is tabs. The ribbon menu system that we see in Excel 2010 And this is almost the same as what you might have seen if you were using Excel 2007 or if you're using Excel 2013. Slightly different color background maybe, but the Home tab on the ribbon, the one that I currently have active, probably has buttons that many of you are familiar with. Maybe you've used Microsoft Word or you've used Excel a little bit. You probably know that B means bold and I means italic and so on. Typically when in a worksheet, as you're looking around here and you slide over these buttons, there's a little pop-up that tells you what the button does. Now, it would be a bad idea to say, I'm going to learn all these buttons. You don't want to do that. That's a waste of time. Certainly some of them you will want to use. Some of them you'll know almost immediately. Many of them have keystroke shortcuts as well. Sometimes that's faster. And when you slide the mouse over one of these buttons, you're going to see this. Now, in working with Excel from day to day, probably most people have the Home tab active about 75% of the time. And there are many, many buttons in it, as I suggested. You can see them here. The ones off to the right are less likely to use, but still, depending upon what you do, and keep reminding yourself too, Excel is used by scientists, by engineers, by business people, by HR specialists. Any number of different kinds of endeavors are involved in working with Excel. And so you'll see things here and there you'll probably never use. And some of the buttons up here represent features that might be better used by using the mouse. And we'll show you some of those as well too. So again, the idea here is to keep your distance a little bit, be inquisitive, and yet at the same time don't be overwhelmed by all these buttons. Now we're not going to go to every tab, but just a quick reminder here. If you click Insert, you'll see other buttons there, and surely some of those words or phrases are familiar to you. And again, there might be some new things out here like spark lines. If you're interested in charts, we'll be coming back here a bit, maybe taking a look at these. Page layout has a lot to do with printing. You can tell that by the buttons. The Formulas tab has a lot to do, of course, with formulas, but also with that all-important category of Excel usage called functions too. If you're trying to manage large lists, the Data tab has a number of buttons as well. Sorting, filtering, there's a subtotal choice over here to the right. Again, sometimes just seeing the words reminds you, or at least makes you aware of certain features in Excel maybe you have not yet seen, or maybe not even aware of, like removing duplicates maybe. It sounds like a powerful tool. And there's a Review tab and a View tab as well. So many, many users, much of the time, have the Home tab active, but as we'll see at different times, there are other needs as well. The bulk of the screen is comprised of what we call an actual worksheet. And many times when you're working with data, and we don't have any data here yet, you will want to zoom in and out. And the easiest way to do this, even though there is a method in the lower right-hand corner, is to hold down the Control key and use the mouse wheel. Zoom in, zoom out. Even before you have data there, it's useful, it's handy to get used to that idea. Of course, this has no impact on the content, if there were any content here. I say, as you're working with data, make it large, make it clear. It's going to be easier. You'll make fewer mistakes that way too. And for the record here, as we look at the screen here, down the left-hand side we see numbers. Those are row numbers. Across the top we see column letters. And we never want to use those two words interchangeably. Columns are vertical. They're identified by letters. And as we move to the right, I'm sure many of you have worked with Excel already. You know, after the letters go through A through Z, then they start over again, A, B, and so on and so on. And as you move rightward here, you can use the right arrow keys on your keyboard. You could also use Tab if you wanted to move across. It would take you a long, long time to get to the far right side. I'm going to hold down the Control key and press the right arrow. And there's the very last column. It even goes into a three-letter scheme. That's 16,384 columns if you were counting. We probably aren't. Anytime you want to go to the upper left-hand corner of a worksheet, press Control Home. Control Home. The Home key usually is in a separate keypad area off to the right. On certain laptops, sometimes you'll find it embedded on top of another key as well. So you might have to look around for that if you haven't used it. Control Home takes us to the upper left. And nearly always it takes us into column A, row 1. There's an exception to that, which we'll point out later. Every one of these cells here has an address comprised of the column letter and row number. And anytime you, either with the mouse or arrow keys, go to this cell or that cell, the column letter and row number happens to be highlighted. And in the upper left-hand corner, for example, this is cell B3. If we were to move down, this would take us a long, long time as I press the arrow keys here. If I hold down Control, and you can certainly try that yourself, Control, hold that down, press down arrow, that's how many rows we have. If you're wondering where that number comes from, it's a power of 2. It's 2 to the 20th power. So over 1 million rows here. Over 1 million rows. Plenty of room for most applications. And how do we get back up to the top? Control Home. A giant grid of over 1 billion cells. Over 1 billion cells. And of course, much of the time we're not using all the rows. And I've never seen a worksheet that used all the columns. I can't imagine that really. It's funny, a few years ago in the older versions, there were only 256 columns, and some people told Excel, some users said, we need at least a column for every day of the year. And Microsoft responded by giving us a column for the next 43 years. A bit of overkill there. Now, one other area we want to mention, first of all, an area above this we'll mention just briefly. This is called the formula bar up here. This doesn't have a lot of meaning just yet, but it becomes increasingly important as we work with Excel. For the moment, nothing much to say about it. At the bottom of the screen, below those sheet tabs is an area. It's called the status bar, and for the moment, it too doesn't contain much. There are a few buttons off to the right that we'll mention later. But as we work with Excel, certain words, certain features will pop up in the status bar that will be of note. So let's, what I'm going to do here is build a small worksheet. I don't want you to watch me do much typing here. If you're following along, you could do this too. I'll probably move it a little bit faster than you might want me to if you're trying to type what I'm typing. And not that I'm a great typist, but the focus should be on just paying attention here. I know for some of you, the next minute or two is going to be pretty basic, but we do want to get a few things down. Let's imagine that two different kinds of scenarios here. We've started a small business out of our home, and maybe we've tabulated, we're trying to tabulate here what happened in the first half of the year. From another perspective, maybe this is a company and the numbers we're putting in are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's say we want to record some data. Now, I want to also point out something here too. From certain people's perspective, Excel is viewed as a spreadsheet program, and they think of accounting and finance. And there's no question that Excel certainly is that kind of a package for a lot of people. For others, they don't view Excel that way. They think of it as a list handling kind of software where they maintain inventory or they keep track of personnel, an HR kind of list. So there are different ways we can use Excel. What if we wanted to track just for the first 6 months of the year the progress of our little business? So I'm going to type the word sales. And immediately you might notice something. I'm typing, why is that on the left side of the cell? That's what happens in Excel unless you're typing pure numbers or formulas. Excel automatically says, I'll put this data, if it's not a number, in the left side of a cell. And of course, at different times you might want to change that, but many times we'll leave it as we see it. How do we complete an entry? We can either press one of the arrow keys, we could press Tab to move rightward, Enter to move downward. I'll simply press Enter. And I'm going to type expenses. Maybe I've been working in Canada recently. I type the C here and I say, oops, I don't want to do that. It's not left arrow that I press, it's backspace, SES, Enter, and then profits. And Enter. Later I changed my mind. I want this to be overhead. I'll change my mind. Do I have to erase it? No. Many, many times in Excel we don't really get rid of the data in Excel. We simply type right over it. So I'll put in overhead. I get a phone call. I'm a little bit interrupted. Somebody says, yeah, make sure you use the word expenses there because we're not using overhead. That has a different meaning somewhere else. So how do I change my mind? Many times in Excel, and I don't want to say overstate it, but there are times in Excel when you do something, say, oops, never mind, I don't want to do that. You can undo the last action. Control-Z is a nice keystroke shortcut. If you use Microsoft Word, it's the same there too, so that's handy. The other thing too, in one area of the screen that I've not yet pointed out that I do want to mention too, at the very top of the screen, unless you've moved it, is something called the Quick Access Toolbar. Initially, when you start Excel, you'll see 3 or 4 buttons here. One of them will be a counterclockwise arrow called Undo. You will be able to undo your last action. And you can also undo up to your last 100 actions. That certainly seems like overkill. There could be times, though, when you've gone down a certain path, you've taken 6 or 7 steps, and you realize, oops, I shouldn't have done that. You can go back and undo those. You cannot be selective in that. You can only undo consecutive steps. So I might just retype expenses. I could certainly do that. Or I'll just press Control-Z. That's the last thing I did. So we're back here. And you'll find at certain times it's a real lifesaver. Maybe you deleted a column of data and it causes formulas to go haywire and it looks a real mess. Control-Z, real lifesaver. Or that counterclockwise arrow up there. I've made changes, additions to my Quick Access toolbar. A bit later we'll show you how to do that. That area up there, you can also move those buttons if you wish to put them below the ribbon, but I'll put them above. And again, I didn't use that word too often. The word ribbon is what we call our menu system here that's comprised of tabs. So today, kind of boring stuff, but we got to do that. Later we might want to realign that in the center of each cell or on the right side. We'll get to that pretty soon. I'm going to put in some months here. I'm going to type January. Now, Excel recognizes that many, many times when you're putting in a monthly series, you probably want to put in other months as well. Now, I've completed this, and I really don't want to go down here. I want to move to the right. Now, I could certainly type February and March and April and so on. But another feature that's really handy, anytime you're putting in months of the year, days of the week, or quarters, you can simply put in one entry, and Excel allows you to copy from the lower right-hand corner. Now, another bit of terminology you'll see from time to time. At any given time, whatever cell is active on the screen is referred to as the active cell. And in the lower right-hand corner of that active cell is a button. It's called the fill handle. Notice that the mouse pointer often looks like this. As I slide the mouse pointer over the corner, lower right-hand corner, the mouse pointer becomes more like crosshairs. So I'll hold down the left mouse button. And as I drag rightward, look at the pop-up tip. That says February, March, April, May, June. I'll let go. Save me some time. Now, I wouldn't drag downward in this case, but just to show you what would happen here, I'm going to drag downward. What happens here? Same thing. If I drag beyond December, it simply starts January all over again. Now, it's pretty obvious I don't want to keep this, so I'll press Control-Z. That's really handy. Anytime you drag rightward or downward, beginning with any month, you will get the following months that way. So if I drag downward from June here, and again, I don't want to do that really, but just to show what happened, we see what happens this way. And if I drag leftward from January, look what happens here. And if I drag upward from November, you see what happens. This is always dragging from the lower right-hand corner. So it's pretty obvious I don't want to keep those there. I'll press Control-Z, Control-Z, Control-Z. Really handy. If you would prefer to put in 3-letter abbreviations, you can do that. They must be 3 letters. Most of the time you'll start with JAN, as I'm doing here, and I'll point to that lower right-hand corner, that fill handle, hold down the left mouse button, drag rightward. There we are. Now, even before I put in numbers, I think what a lot of us would want to do, I think most of us would agree, these are likely to look better if they are either centered or right aligned. And on the Home tab, in the ribbon right here, there's center, we could do that, or there's right. And at certain times you change your mind. It's so easy to change, you hardly give it a second thought after a while. It's going to be really handy. You can do the same kind of entries there with days of the week, or their 3-letter abbreviations. So if you are starting these, don't ever start with SEPT. It would have to be an SEP if that's your starting month. And if you're using days of the week, again, full spellings or 3-letter abbreviations only. I'm going to put in a number here, mistype on purpose. It's going to be 150. Maybe I've got caps lock on, and I type capital O. I'm finished there. I want to move to the right. I can press the Tab key. Now I'm going to type a number correctly. It's 180. And you can see right away when the 0 and O are nearby, they look quite a bit different. Now look what happens when I press Tab. Numbers or formulas in Excel are always what we call right aligned. If you remember back in the, when was it, 2nd grade, when they taught us to add or subtract, or later multiply, we always lined up our numbers together along the right-hand side. Good idea, good still. This is not a number. That's 150. That's a capital O. Excel immediately sees that. Of course, we wouldn't keep it that way. 150. You don't want to watch me type. I've got another set of numbers here. I've done the typing ahead of time on another worksheet to the right. So I'm going to click on this next sheet, sheet 2. There it is. So those are the numbers I want to put in, and some other text as well. So basic data entry, we put in numbers. Numbers are always right aligned. Keep them that way. The only possible exception could be if you're dealing with ID numbers. You could center them, wouldn't make any difference. But if there's any use of numbers in a computational sense, keep them right aligned. And if we have decimals, you could imagine what a list might look like with decimals if we centered the data. And some of the numbers might be under 1,000, some might be under 10,000, but higher and so on. But the decimals wouldn't line up. Do not center numbers, a bad idea. And at times Excel won't let you do that either. Over in column A, I've got some other data too. We might want to approach putting that bit of information in. We'll get to that a bit later. So all we've done so far is basic data entry. If there are any questions out there, Joe or Christopher, possibly by now, maybe not?
Not so
Okay, good.
I'm answering myself. And sounds great.
Okay. So what should we do by now? Well, I think you've all, at one time or another, if you work with Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or even Excel, have you ever had that time when maybe there was a power failure? It doesn't happen very often. Did you possibly kick the plug or push the on-off button by mistake? We don't want this to get lost, so we probably need to save it. And basic saving. The one tab in the ribbon here that's different from all the others is the one on the far left called File. And Excel, or Microsoft, calls this the backstage view. I don't hear other people using that very much, but anyway, this is where we can save our work. Anytime you're saving a file, you'll notice the choice is Save and Save As. If there's any doubt whatsoever, if you're a little bit uncomfortable with what you're about to do, Save As is always a little bit safer, let's say. It's a little bit more, takes you a tad more time. Let's just click Save As and see what it takes us. Now, possibly your screens would look a little bit different here if you're using a different operating system, but I think most of you probably know, if you've worked with other software, you know, when it comes time to save, it's certainly important. If it's the first time you're saving this particular set of data, you'd want to give it a sensible name. For example, I'm looking at the data here. I might just say, for example, first half report. So let's give it a name, first half report maybe. We've got up to 255 characters here. We can use spaces. Certain symbols don't work. I'd say stay away from most of them. A dash certainly works. Stay away from asterisk for sure. But I'm just going to put in the first half report. Occasionally you may need to save your current workbook in a different version of Excel. That's less commonly needed these days, but if somehow you were sending it to someone who was using an older version of Excel, in this dialog box toward the very bottom it says Save As Type, a huge number of other possibilities. I don't want to go there because there's just too many to talk about. Most people don't need that most of the time. But certainly the other important consideration is, where do you want to save this? As you've got a folder on your current computer, or if you've got a flash drive, or if you want to put it on the desktop somewhere. I don't want to go into all the details about where you could go there, but no, I'll just put this on the desktop. I'll call it first half report and save. And I have another file out there with that name already, so I don't want to overwrite it. So maybe I'll call it first half report -November, or maybe just put in today's date, 11-4-14, just to make it different than the other file, and save. And of course, from time to time, as we update and make changes here, we will want to again save. The term update, by the way, doesn't really appear in the menu, but we want to save this again at different times. All right, we've done the grunt work, let's say, of data entry. Let's talk about formulas. Certainly one of the essential aspects of working with Excel. Even if you work for this and don't deal with formulas, at some time or another you're going to be working with formulas. And certainly people in the financial arena, accountants, finance people certainly will be using formulas a lot. Many times they're not difficult. An example here, all we want to do is subtract those two numbers there. And as a general rule, we don't type the values of cells, we type the content, or we refer to the information by location. Formulas begin with equal sign. Now, we can say B2 minus B3. We do not type 150 minus 110 because those numbers might change, and we want the flexibility here of having them to be adjusted possibly. We'll put in the actual address or the location. Two ways to do this, actually three, but two major ways. I'm going to type B2. When you're typing these addresses, the locations, you don't need to capitalize them, minus B3. And enter or tab. If I want to go over it, I'll press. Get in the habit of, as you click on a cell, particularly in a worksheet you're not familiar with, keep an eye on the formula bar. The real content of that cell isn't 40, it's B2 minus B3. If you look in the formula bar above, you see that, you are reminded of the fact that it's a formula. If you double-click a cell, the formula will appear right in the cell. If it doesn't have a formula, I'm going to double-click in the cell above it, click just a number. This is a formula. Another way to write this formula, it might involve two hands, not necessarily, but it will not involve much typing other than the equal sign and the minus. So a different way to do this, let me delete this first, equal, click B2, minus, click B3, all done, enter or tab. Do it that way. Now, one of Excel's great shortcuts, and we use it a lot, not only across rows, but many times down columns. In the cell to the right, what do we want to do? The same kind of thing. This formula that we wrote in B4 subtracts the two cells above and in a circle. We want to do the same thing here? We surely do, and here, all the way across. So we don't need to go through any fancy methods of copying and pasting. We use what's called the fill handle in the lower right-hand corner. Put the mouse right on that fill handle, hold down the left mouse button, drag to the right. Many, many times you'll be using that. Each of these has a formula. You can see the numbers right away, even if you're not a math whiz. Double-click any one of these just to make sure, and you'll see immediately what's going on. Notice that they are color-coded as well. That's helpful in some situations where you've got formulas that deal with 5 or 6 different cells. If the cells are nearby, this brings out the idea of what the formula is actually working with. So pretty basic stuff as we do this. Now, based on what we've seen here, simple subtraction here, if we were to put in a total out here in cell H2, I think it would be not inappropriate to start typing equal and either type or click on B2 and then plus and then B2 and so on. I know there is a better way. This would not be the best way to get this done. But it certainly would be correct if we did this all the way through G2. But would we really want to do something like that? And what if this were 12 months? What if it were 2 years? Back and forth, back and forth. Surely we click in the wrong place or type the wrong entry. This is not the best way to do this. And there are a couple of different approaches. We'll show them to you all. Or not all the ones, but we'll show all of them to you. Built into Excel are over 450 functions. It's a key component of what Excel is all about. If you click on the Formulas tab in the ribbon, this is how they're generally categorized. And by the way, when you are looking at these, don't overlook the button More Functions, because that leads us even into other categories as well. Now, at first, you wouldn't know where to begin, but probably the most common function in Excel, and you could find it there. We don't need to find it that way, but we'll find it a bit later maybe. The most common function in Excel, probably for everybody, is the sum function. And anytime you type equal and then a single letter, all functions that begin with that letter appear just below. We'll see it in here eventually. There it is. Now, you don't have to find it this way each time. We're going to be typing it this time. We'll show you a shortcut a bit later. The sum function. All functions are followed by an open and then later a closed parentheses, left parent and a right parent, probably the better way to say it. And like most functions, you put the data between the two parentheses. Now, I don't think it's intuitive at first, but what we really want to do is to add up all these cells. And although you could put in B2, C2, that is not the best way to do this. We're simply going to use the mouse. And we can either highlight these cells from left to right or right to left. So after typing the left parent, I'm going to put the mouse pointer in G2, hold down the left mouse button, drag leftward. We do not have to type the right parentheses when we're only using a function with a single set of parentheses here. Excel will do that for us. I'll press enter, all done. And as we click here, either look in the formula bar or double click, we see what's happening. First thought might be, if you've never used functions, what happens if a number changes? Well, I'll change the 150 over here to be 200. Now, it will cause a change there, but it will also cause a change in cell B4. There we go. And I'll undo it with Control Z. With the 90 we now see here, we'll change back. The 200 will go back to 150. And our 1770 to the right will change as well if I press Control Z to undo. Here we are. It's back to 1720. I meant to point out earlier, but I'll do it now. If the expenses exceed the sales, maybe we just got a quick phone call here and we forgot to record that one expense, and it was substantial. Our expenses were 160. Press enter, minus 10. The formula does its work. So it turns out that was a mistake. We'll undo that. Increasingly, you develop the idea that the numbers you see on the screen certainly look like numbers, but many, many times they are formulas. And we're adding formulas to this worksheet as we go. Well, here's the sum function. Let's go back again. I'll double click. That certainly is appropriate many, many times, and what we did here is just fine, and certainly better than adding up the cells one by one. But there is a shortcut, and almost everybody learns it early on in Excel, and it's going to save us a ton of time. I'm going to delete this. On the Formulas tab, near the left side, is a button called Auto Sum. And the pop-up below says display the sum of the selected cells directly after the selected cells. So we could click that button there, and we see what happens. That's what we had seen earlier. In fact, we typed most of it, so we could certainly do that. Let me press Escape. I'll also point out to you that on the Home tab, remember, this is the tab that many of us have active much of the time. The Auto Sum button, although smaller, is off to the right. There's Auto Sum. Same button, same idea. We could do that as well too. And at other times, you might think it faster. Keystroke shortcut, Alt equal. There it is. Same thing. In all these cases, what do we do when we're finished? Enter. So either Alt equal, or we can use the Auto Sum button. If this formula that we just put in here is adding up the 6 cells to its left, what happens if we copy that formula here and here? The same relative thing will happen. You'll hear that term from time to time. We talk about formulas being relative, meaning if we copy them into one row downward, it's going to adjust all the row references. Therefore, this formula, what does it do? It adds up all the cells in row 3 instead of row 2. Drag it down here, same thing. And we could have done the drag simply once. Let me undo those last actions. Here's our formula. We put it in once, drag from the lower right-hand corner. That way, we got it this way. Now, it gets even better. What if I didn't put any of these in? In other words, what if I empty, we start over? We could do this, make it faster in a couple of ways. Click here, use Auto Sum, double click it, click, in either of its locations. That's pretty fast. Then drag this downward. You can do it that way. But one more improvement. We've got nothing here at all. By the way, I just pressed the delete key. I should have said that. Let me go back just for a second here. If you want to get rid of data in a cell or a group of cells, click here. You can press the delete key. So what if we didn't have any formulas there and we highlight 3 cells? We're in a hurry. We can press Alt equal or Auto Sum. All 3 totals appear at once. That's as fast as it gets. Auto Sum is designed to look at data in a particular way. For the moment, I'm going to put some data right here. Just make them up as I go. I'm also going to put some numbers out here. Now, if I want to put a total here, The AutoSum capability always looks upward first for data, then leftward. I might want to be adding up these cells, but if I go here and click the AutoSum button, AutoSum says, I see numbers above, I'm going to add those. If you want to add the numbers to the left, simply take the mouse, I'm pointing at the 45 right here, hold down the left mouse button, drag leftward. Enter, all done. So you can redirect it. We don't really need these numbers here, so I'll press delete, or possibly, this isn't much better really, but you can drag from the corner across the data. Also erase it. Now, so far in this worksheet, it looks like we've got, what, 21 numbers? Well, in a certain sense we do, but these are the numbers. Everything in row 4 is a formula, everything in column H is a formula. We use the terms formulas and functions, sometimes interchangeably. Let's say formula is the more comprehensive term, but these are, to be a little bit more precise, functions. We're using the function sum in these cases, right there. So we've done some more work here. Again, we don't obsess over power failures. That probably doesn't happen very often, but what we should do every so often is save our work again. We don't necessarily have to go back into File, Save As. The Save button is likely to be in your Quick Access toolbar. You can also press Control-S. So remember, after saving the file once, save a second, third, fourth time really means let's update the file to make sure that it looks exactly like what we're seeing on the screen. And we do that periodically.
Hello, Dennis. This is Christopher.
Yes.
If anyone has any questions, please key them in, and I'll try to respond, and Dennis will respond to some of those as well. So I haven't seen very many questions. So if you have any, please let us know.
That
did not receive the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that suggests people probably are absorbing this. Maybe I should move along a little bit faster, possibly.
Should he go faster, people, or how is the pace for you? Please, if you could type that in. And if you did not receive the files, let us know, and Drew will send those to you. All right. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. Now, let's say we're not quite at the printing stage yet, or the presentation stage, so it might look a little funny on the screen. We didn't do anything with those months, but that would be nagging and bothering some people. Let's take care of this. The way we see the months here. By the way, there's a word you'll hear all the time in Excel, and sometimes you forget that some people have never heard it, but let's say we select the data. We want to highlight all the data from B1 over to I1. How do we select data? We hold down the left mouse button and drag across cells. Left to right, right to left, doesn't make any difference. So, and sometimes you'll hear the word highlight. So let's highlight these cells right here. Click and drag, it's also called. Hold them down that way. There we go. Let's highlight those. On the Home tab, we could center the data this way. We could right align it. At different times, we'll change our mind. Easy to do. No need to use any commands or any other feature that way. Easy. All right. Let's expand this a little bit. Let's, first of all, maybe take care of the averages, because a couple of other issues might come up here, too. I'm going to zoom back a little bit. Remember, it's Control with the mouse wheel. An average here. Average. How do we do an average? We add up the numbers and divide by the number of entries. You could say, well, we've already done the addition, so if we want the average sales per month, first 6 months, certainly one way is equal, type or click H2. The division symbol is the slash key, the one that's angled this way, not the other direction, divided by 6. That's certainly one way to do this. And we can drag that from the lower right-hand corner, drag downward. And as we do, it makes these entries. It's pretty apparent that eventually we will want to change the look of those, but the numbers are correct. And I'll double-click right here again. Now again, as you get in the habit of clicking on a cell, you don't necessarily have to double-click it, but look in the formula bar, you see the formulas there. Eventually, of course, we are going to make this uniform. We would not make this or use this in its current state for presentation or printing purposes. It just looks weird. But it does accentuate the idea that, the numbers are not always even, and that's fine. There is another way to do this. Much of the time it's going to be identical. There is a function in Excel called average, and we will get the exact same answer here. Now, the only difference could be, in some worksheets, you'll see averages being set up before the data is all recorded. What if you were setting up this worksheet, you decided to set it up, say in April, and maybe you just got your March data. these numbers are all blank. The formula that you would have then, if you're using a formula of this type, would be H2 divided by 3. Then as soon as you put in the April data, you'd have to change this to be divided by 4, and then 5, then 6. So if you wanted a formula that was accurate all along, regardless of how many entries, you would type, or could type, equal average, left parenthesis, and you do know how to type, know how to spell average. There we go. So right after the left parentheses, you would highlight these cells, either left to right or right to left. Now, the average function will work regardless of how many entries. So let's maybe backtrack a little bit. Maybe that's the formula, average. What if my new number has not yet been recorded? I'm going to, for the moment, just delete that. The current average that we see is the sum of all data found here divided by 5. That's what the average function does. It divides by the number of cells that have data. Now, many, many times this is not an issue, but you want to be a little bit careful with it because here's a simple little example. Here's a salesperson who had sold 10 items on Monday, no items on Tuesday, and 10 items on Wednesday. Here's another salesperson who sold 10 items on Monday, was sick on Tuesday, and sold 10 items on Wednesday. So what's the average here? Equal average of these 3 cells. 6 2/3. What's the average of these 3 cells? 10. Big difference there. If we're adding them, it's the same in both. It's 20. We get some real differences. So be real careful with averages. Are cells blank, or do they have zeros or numbers in them? You'll get different kinds of answers, and sometimes somewhat confusing. I don't need this. Highlight this. Press delete. So anyway, food for thought about average. If we had all the numbers in place, this is not an issue at all. I'll put the 500 back in. Same answer we had before. So you'll get the answer whether you do average or whether you do equal H2 divided by 6. Well, I like this. Maybe I'll just copy it downward. Same answers. All right, year-to-date profits. This is not higher math, but yet potentially tricky, and we're reminded of this idea of how Excel copies formulas. By the end of February, we've made how much money? 90. So we might say, we're going to put in a formula here that adds these 2 cells. If we do put a formula there and then copy it to here, what will this formula do? If this formula adds these 2, then this formula would add these 2. And that wouldn't be year-to-date, would it? Let's first of all take care of January. The January entry should always be the same as this, no matter what. This is the formula, but if we want this to always be equal to that, our formula right here is equal this cell. Okay. So that's our year-to-date. For the moment, they're identical, of course. So what should our formula be here?
I'm sorry, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
What does a colon mean when it's in a formula?
Nearly always a colon means, for example, out here in column I, B4 colon G4 means, let's take cell B4 and G4 and all the ones in between. And all the ones in between as well. Inclusive, that's what it means. Include everything between those 2.
What if you had a comma after G4 and then another range? What would that mean?
It would simply mean you want to add different data. Let me take what would be a really bizarre formula and probably totally inappropriate, but I could type equal sum, left parenthesis, and say, I'd like to add my January and February sales, comma, and then my April and May sales. That is a valid formula that will add up 4 different cells. And furthermore, I want to add 100 to it. Now, again, why would I ever do this? Probably never quite like this, but it does point out you can gather data from different locations. And I'll press enter and I'll have an answer. A very strange answer because it's adding January and February and April and May and then 100.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes. All right, we'll go back here, and again, sometimes you have to think ahead a little bit. So we know that the answer here should be 90, but do we get to 90 by adding these 2 cells or by adding these 2? One way to think of this could be, When you deposit money into a bank, for example, do you add it to your previous deposit or do you add it to your previous balance? And so if you think of it that way, equal, here's our current amount, or the amount we're depositing, plus what we already had in there. In other words, our previous year to date. And then as we think about this, in fact, we could just drag this right. We're just drag it just one cell to the right. What's our cumulative total now? That seems to make sense. Now, if you view this as being this, adding up these numbers, you get 170. But let's say what we're doing here is adding the March entry, our latest entry, our latest profit figure, onto our previous year to date. That's what makes sense. Again, not higher math, maybe just a little tricky at first. And we'll copy this using the fill handle in the lower right-hand corner, copy it to there. And of course, these two numbers should match. Now, a really handy shortcut in Excel, and it's out of nowhere, and you certainly would never guess it. Never is it intuitive, but it's really handy, and you'll use it a lot probably. Above the Tab key, below the Escape key, to the left of the number 1 key on nearly all U.S. keyboards, upper left corner of most keyboards, is a key that's got the tilde symbol on top. That squiggly little character, you'll see it above the letter N in some words in Spanish. You'll see it above the letter A in some Portuguese words, whatever. It's also a math symbol. But if you hold down the Control key and not the Shift key, and press that tilde key, a funny thing happens on the screen, weird thing. All column widths are doubled. But more important, it shows us formulas wherever they exist. It does no damage, it doesn't do any harm or anything. I'm going to zoom back a little bit here. Because it doubles the width of columns, it sort of unsettles you a little bit. Maybe even scares you, like, how do I get back to my, what was it? It's what we call a toggle button. Control tilde will take us back to normal. I'll scroll left a little bit here so we can see everything. I'm going to press Control tilde again. There it is. Wherever there are formulas, we see them, or back to normal. It's a great worksheet troubleshooting tool. It helps us any number of different times here as we're looking at a worksheet trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe somebody else wrote these formulas. Really handy. Control tilde. So I'm going to zoom back in again. That is a reminder too, and we haven't typed in any more numbers. Here are the real numbers, and those are just pure values typed in. Everything on the perimeter is a formula. We're not trying to suggest either that the more formulas you create off the data, the better. There is an old phrase I haven't heard in a while called the paralysis of analysis. We can analyze these numbers to death. That's not really the focus here. We're trying to come up, and we hope that these numbers here are meaningful to us. That's the idea, of course. All right. As we look at this again, this starts to make sense. This emphasizes or accentuates the idea of what we call a relative formula. This formula here adds the cell above it and the cell to its left. What does this formula do? Because we copied it to the right, what does this do? It adds the cell above and the cell to its left. And that's what we want to have happen all the way across. A relative copy. All right, percent profit change. If we made 40, then we made 50, then we made 80. Looks like we're making some progress here, but what's the percent of change? And you might have to ask a 6th grader or a 7th grader about how to do this if you forget. I think most people probably do know how to do it ultimately. How much have we grown? If we grow from 40 to 50, we've grown by 10. That's a quarter of what we started with. It's 25%. But the math sometimes, even though not difficult, can mess us up a little bit in Excel. And there are a couple of rules we want to bring out here. I'm going to write the formula the way I expressed it here. To calculate this, we need to take the difference of our February entry minus our January entry. We can't do this for January because we don't have any other figure that occurred before it. So we want to take that difference, which is 10, and then divide it by what we started with. 50 minus 40 is 10. Divide that by 40. We should get 0.25, 25%. But as I press enter, that's not what we're getting. And we know that's not right, and how that gets there. Strange, isn't it? Now, by the way, some of you, if you were doing that with me here, you might have gotten this number. And that's, of course, equally wrong. Depends how that cell might have been formatted. What really happened here, though? How did we come up with a 49? anytime a formula is wrong in Excel, one of the first things you want to consider is, did you or did you not use parentheses? Did you possibly use them in the wrong way, or maybe you forgot to use them? Now, if you're familiar with standard calculators, and we're not using them nearly as much as we used to, but standard calculators perform calculations left to right. If you punched into a calculator a 50, and then you put a minus, and then you put in a 40, as soon as you put in the division symbol, it's already done the subtraction. In fact, you might even be seeing a 10 on the screen. Then you punch in, after the division symbol, the 40, then you press enter, and you'd have your answer. But what I want to point out here, and you won't see this on an Excel screen unless you put it there, Excel looks for parentheses first. Then it looks for another symbol here, which we'll get back to in a second, called a caret. It's above the number 6 key. Then it looks for multiplication and division, and in no particular order. And finally, it looks for addition and subtraction. So, in a certain sense, what does Excel do when it sees this formula? The first symbol that it sees looking down that list that's used in the formula is division. It does this first. B4 divided by B4 is 1. What's C4 minus 1? 50 minus 1? 49. That's where we get the answer. What are we going to do? Parentheses right here. A lot of people overcompensate. They put in more parentheses. Usually that's not a problem, but it does cause some clutter, maybe in the visual. This should give us the correct answer. There it is. Most people would want to format that. On the Home tab, here's a % button. You can do that, certainly. You could also press Control-Shift % sign if you wish. That's the number most of us would want to see. Now, going back here again, double-clicking. As I suggested, some people will put in an extra parenthesis on the right and one on the left, and there's nothing wrong with that, although it's unnecessary. Some people put another one here. Now I'm putting in one extra one here, and I'm going to press enter. And the reason this will be incorrect is my left and right parens are not matching up. Now many times, but I don't want to say always because it's not true, many times Excel senses what you're doing and says, I'm going to make a correction. Well, let's see if it gets it right here. It's going to use overkill as well and give us the correct answer, but you know, more parentheses than we need. So again, I'm going to take out some of these, do this. There we go. We do need that initial set. And there we go. And if this formula here is dealing with those two cells, do we then want to copy this to the right? We surely do. So looking ahead here, if we're going to be comparing these numbers, we've grown by 30. We started with 50. It's going to be, what, 60% growth? There we are, and so on. We'll drag this over to the right. Now, by the way, this formula could have some real problems if any of those numbers is 0 or goes below 0. You will have some problems with that. We'll get into that possibly in another session maybe. If these numbers are lower, say they're below 10%, it's more or less a common convention, not a rule, that you might want to show a decimal here. And on this Home tab, right where we see the % symbol, there is a button off to the right. We probably wouldn't use it here, but you could increase the decimal. That 38, for example, is probably 37.5, and there we see it. Wouldn't make much difference here for most people, but we could certainly change that as well, too. So we put in some formulas here. Again, the object is not to say we've got more and more formulas. These are all based on those 12 numbers. But we do begin to realize that in some worksheets, changing a single number has a big impact. And every so often you might think, gee, how did they do this before computers? Maybe back in the 60s before personal computers were around or something. You mean you change one number? What's going to happen if we change this one number? Well, here's a formula that refers to it. That's going to change. And the one below it's going to change. And then all these here are going to change. I could highlight them all if we wanted to. Probably a lot of the percents will change, totals over here. Huge impact just by changing one cell. Again, we won't constantly harp on that idea, but if you have worked with larger worksheets, financial type worksheets, you recognize sometimes a single change has a huge impact. Excel even has methods for telling us what that impact will be. We could eventually show you how to find the dependence of this cell. change this cell, and we could have a nice display to do that as well too. Remember, every so often, and particularly on a worksheet you're not familiar with, one you haven't seen in a while, maybe zoom back a little bit first and press Control-tilde. There we go. Just to see the formulas, you might have to scroll rightward, leftward, and so on. That's a reminder. And any of you who has been working with Excel worksheets for a while, you also develop sort of a sense, I don't want to call it a sixth sense necessarily, but as you look at data like this, many, many times when you see certain words and phrases, you say, I'll bet that's a formula. And you look in the formula bar and so on. Not always, but many times you develop a sense of that. There's another shortcut here, too, that is very valuable at times. Somebody asked me on the fly, how about first quarter sales? What were they? As I highlight these three cells, I'll say immediately 580. Now, I'm pretty good at math, but am I that fast? And how about these three? That's 1140. How about the expenses here? What's that there? That's 410. And how about this here? That's 720. But look in the status bar in the lower right part of the screen down here. Anytime you highlight two or more cells that contain values, you're going to get some totals. Now, there are potentially 6 statistical measures down here. If you right-click in the status bar, there's all kinds of checkboxes, but here's a selection of 6 right in this area right here. You'll see this after you've right-clicked the status bar. There's a box for average count, numerical count, minimum, maximum, and sum. I don't need all these, but I leave these boxes checked usually all the time. If I'm on a different computer, maybe somebody else's, I might right-click down here and maybe see some of these not checked. Many times I don't care about numerical count, but sometimes you might use it as a formula verifier. Sometimes you just want to know what profits for the first quarter here. You know, the numbers there are easy enough. You can probably do it in your head, of course, but it's 170. Second quarter, that's 420. We see this down here. How about the average of these numbers, just to verify our number off to the right? We look at the bottom of the screen there, 286.66666, etc. Average expenses, these are the very numbers we're seeing over here in column I. We also see them at the bottom of the screen. So it comes in really handy at times. Okay, once again, we should probably save our work. And again, you can press Control-S if you're looking at that button in the Quick Access toolbar. And it's a reminder, by the way, that looks like a diskette. When was the last time you saw a diskette? I think they're going to have to change that symbol, maybe.
Can I ask you a quick question, Dennis?
Sure.
Do you ever use the auditing toolbar in Excel?
Which toolbar?
The auditing toolbar?
Oh, absolutely. Well, there is no auditing toolbar anymore in this version, but since you asked, I do want to bring that out. I did mention the feature of it. This is maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but it's okay. On the Formulas tab in the ribbon, there's a button called Trace Dependence. I'm going to click this and keep clicking it. Now, if my speaker was on, we'd hear a beep, but what does that show us? If I change cell B2, every cell that we see there that has an arrow or a dot in it, some have both, will change immediately. So I'm not exactly counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 other cells will change if I change that 150. This is how we can trace dependence. And then right below that is a choice called Remove Arrows. So that's a handy tool if you've got to do worksheet auditing. I do not envy the task of anyone doing auditing because some large worksheets are really complex and hard to figure out, but that would be of value. Here's the reverse idea. I've got a total right here in cell H4, and somebody says to me, where did you get that total? I get this total from what? Trace precedence. Once, twice, 3 times. So every one of those numbers, and we're talking about all these numbers in here, if I change any one of those total will change. Now that's, in retrospect, could be obvious probably, but see what happened there too. Those are certainly valuable tools. They used to be part of what's called the auditing toolbar. That's the term you use, Christopher. But now it's in this group called formula auditing. So it's those same features, but available to us from a different location.
Okay. Thank you.
And then remove arrows. Now, These symbols down here, just a quick reminder. By the way, this term, the symbol here, not too many of you will need this. It's how we raise numbers to a power. So if someone said, I can't imagine the context of it. I need this number squared equal this cell caret 2. Think of the caret as pushing the number up as if it were a superscript. Now, it isn't really a superscript, but if that were B4 squared, we'd have a little 2 in the upper right corner, so that's 1600. Or cubed, and so on. And occasionally, but not very often probably, you might want to get a square root or a cube root. There is a function called SQRT. You could use that. But if you wanted the cube root of a number, you have to put this in parentheses. And this, again, might be recalling either fond or not so fond memories of high school math. That's the 1/3 root. That's the cube root. So the cube root of 40 is 3 point something or other. And there it is, 3.4. Multiply that by itself 3 times, and you'll get 40. So how often will you need that? Probably not too often. Another reason you won't need this sort of thing very often is that Excel has built-in functions, and a lot of functions do the kind of math that you don't necessarily worry about. So the function, for example, that calculates the monthly payment on a car or a house loan actually raises numbers to the minus 360th if it were a house, or minus 60th if it were a car, or something like that. You don't have to worry about that. It's in the background. So most people won't see that symbol. But anytime a formula is not working the way you think it should, first thing to look for, maybe you didn't use parentheses, or maybe you used them incorrectly. Always check that out first. Now, let's focus more on the appearance of this, and also a couple of formatting issues. Certainly we would not print this before a presentation if we were going to use it in a presentation, or if we were going to print it. We've got to have some standard here. Now, let's say it would probably make sense to have all these numbers have a similar look to them. On the Home tab, certainly one choice that we might try right away is the $sign. Now, this uses a format called accounting format. And for the moment, that doesn't mean a whole lot maybe, but it would look like this. Nothing wrong with this. I think in many financial institutions and environments, we don't put $signs on every single cell. If we put them on the top row and nowhere else, it's probably implied that the data below it is also $signs. Sometimes we'll see them on a later row, maybe a subtotal row, or on the bottom somewhere, but certainly not everywhere. Let's say we take these off. Now, what a lot of people would try, and I think almost everybody has at least once, you're going to click the $sign again, right? Well, you just reaffirmed your choice. Unlike bold, italic, underline, which we haven't really used today yet, but those are on-off or toggle buttons. $sign isn't, because there's no real opposite to this. But many, many times, Excel users want to not show the $signs, but they want all other aspects of the format to remain the same. The comma button is probably what you want. Both of these show the decimal, 2 decimal places. If any of these are negative, I'll, for example, force a negative here by making, for example, these expenses, I'll make them be 270. Looks like this. And by the way, that does explain the appearance of these cells. Let me zoom way in. Sometimes you see the numbers and you wonder, why is there is that a space on the right-hand side? Not really. It's sort of like a half space. And the reason that's there is when we have negatives in a column and we're looking at data, we want those decimals to line up. And so this format allows for, if there were negatives, we still want to leave the room out there, and the decimals will all line up for us, at least in certain situations like as we see them here. So that's why we see that. So I'll change that again. Control Z a few times, go back. By the way, the Control Z now is unzooming. That's why it's taking me a few steps to go back. There we are. So I think for many users, many times, this would be how you would display these. In other words, use $sign or comma. Now, even though these numbers are not huge, let's just imagine that they might be, or could be eventually, or something like that. Sometimes you will want to decrease, not increase, but decrease the decimals. Now, as I do this, it's also going to bring back the $signs, at least for the moment. So sometimes that might be a little bit confusing. If we were dealing with numbers in the hundreds of thousands maybe, or millions, it might be appropriate not to show the decimals. These are formatting differences, by the way. They don't change content. This would probably not be a good display. I think most people would agree. If somehow you said, I don't want dollar signs here, nor do I want decimals, you'd highlight all these, choose comma, the comma button, then decrease the decimals twice. You possibly could make a case for this if you want to make the screen look less crowded and so on. So different approaches here. You want to have the sense that you're in charge of the format, and you'll change your mind at different times. It's so easy. And for many, many Excel users, formatting revolves around dollar sign, comma, and then increasing or decreasing. There certainly are some other formats, and there's another format called currency that sometimes is a little confusing with when you're comparing it with accounting here, but I think many times this is the best choice. So once again, I think what I'm going to choose here, for the top row, accounting with the dollar sign, and for these, comma. There we go. Now, I don't need the data out here anymore, or the symbols I put out here in column 8, or I'm sorry, in row 8, 8, 9, 10, 11. Highlight these and press delete. Now, I don't necessarily want to add more here, but let's imagine a few things. What if you said, you know, what I'd like to do here is maybe do this for the second 6 months and do it down below. Do we really have to type all this all over again? Nope, we don't. So let's highlight the data that we'd like to see repeated. Now, you might also be thinking along the lines, should I do this in 6 months chunks? That might not be a great idea, but on the other hand, it might. But let's say we don't want to necessarily retype all this. Highlight this. Many, many times in Excel, I think, and you almost want to develop, and maybe you've done this in Word too, why am I retyping this? Do you ask yourself that question? I shouldn't have to retype this. No, you shouldn't. It's something you say, okay, it's only short, but yeah, why am I retyping? Let's copy this. Anybody who's familiar with copy-paste techniques certainly can use them in Excel. I'm not going to put them down, but many, many times in Excel, the fastest way to copy is to drag data with the Control key. Now, anytime you've got data highlighted, you can put the mouse on the bottom edge, top edge, left edge, right edge. As you slide the mouse over an edge, you'll see a four-way arrow along with a large arrow. If you hold down the left mouse button, the four-way arrow disappears. Now, if I simply wanted to move these down to row 8 or 7 or whatever, I can certainly drag down and let go. And by the way, what happened to this formula? It used to be B2 minus B3. Now it's what? B10 minus B11. You don't worry about that, of course. All right, so I really didn't want to move that, but just to show you could, I can move it back. I can undo, do it that way, or drag from the top edge. Maybe I'll put it back up here. Or maybe I'll put it up there.
Real quick.
Sure.
Would it be possible to wrap up the calculation portion in a few minutes and then move into formatting, column hiding, and navigating around the menu, etc.?
Yeah, the calculation part, at least for this worksheet, I think is done. Although I do want to show people other things that we could possibly do with it real fast. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
If we want to make a copy of this, we can, as I said earlier, but we haven't actually done yet. Remember, dragging an edge moves this, but as we drag, if we hold down the Control key, now you probably can barely see, there's a tiny little plus that accompanies this. I'm going to drag it down to here. I've got the Control key held down, drag it down to here, and I'll let go of the mouse first. Made a copy of it. Now, I don't want to keep it this way, but and I don't know, maybe I don't even have the second half year numbers left here, but I could put in right here, JUL. And not even finish typing it. I'll point to the lower right-hand corner. There's that fill handle. Drag it across. I've got those numbers. Maybe these numbers don't exist yet, so I'll just take them out. And that surely looks funny because we've got formulas out here that refer to empty cells. But we can easily put in our numbers for the second half. Now, the long-range problem here would be that ultimately this probably wouldn't be the best approach because we'd only be dealing with all of our first half numbers together, and then as if we're got a totally different set of numbers, we're dealing with the second half. But we emphasize the idea that we didn't retype any of this stuff here. That we simply recreated, but none of this. We have formulas in place here all set to go as we're looking at this data. So we could certainly do that. Now, there's another thought too, and this is a little more advanced, but not inappropriate. I've decided I don't really want to do this. In fact, well, I'll just do Control-Z a few times. Control-Z, Control-Z, out of here. Here's another thought, and this might be more fruitful in the long run. I've decided that I want to turn this into a full year model eventually. But if I do, I'm not going to be able to see all 12 months at this zoom rate. I'm going to have to scroll back and forth. And now I'm rethinking, gee, wouldn't it have been better if we put the months down the side here? That's a lot of retyping, a lot of reentry. As you look at this data, imagine if the data in row 1 were in column A, down the side. What if we saw January through June, then total, then average? And then what if we saw sales, expenses, profits across maybe, for example, row 8? Without disrupting this, let's copy this. Now, there are 3 ways to copy, at least, and probably more than that in Excel. We don't have to go through all of them. Any time I copy data, and here, if you've used Word, you certainly know a keystroke shortcut. Same one here, Control-C. And another basic shortcut that almost all Excel users use is the right mouse button. It always means shortcut menu. We've highlighted some data, maybe their hand's still on the mouse. Right-click, copy. We can paste this in multiple locations, but there is a special kind of paste. I'm going to right-click here, down in row 8. Pointing here, right-click. There's Paste Special. Now, you can either go to icons, which you might do a little bit later, but if you click this, and you wouldn't know this at first, of course, but here's the Paste Special dialog box and a choice called Transpose. Click OK. Now, adjust the column widths in a bit. We haven't talked about that, but we're seeing the same data down here that we saw up here. And although for the moment we're not seeing a formula down here, we're seeing averages. Everything got, you might say, flipped on the diagonal. We transposed the data. Now, pound signs. You will see these anytime a column is not wide enough to display an entry. And although there are command ways to make a column wider, many people will say, well, I'll just drag a column boundary. If we want column B to be wider, there are 2 ways to do it, 2 major ways. If we point to the right-hand side of column B, between the B and C letters, hold down the left mouse button, drag rightward. We could do it for column C. Make it wider, make it narrower. We can easily do that. Maybe faster, and I'll undo a couple times. We can drag across these columns and double-click the boundary. Double-click means best fit. We can adjust column widths easily that way. So the transpose idea may be a bit advanced possibly, but easy. We simply took this data and displayed it this way. Now, we could easily maybe take out these rows for now, put in our remaining 6 months if we have the data. This probably would be a better layout in terms of seeing the data more easily on the screen. It's not to say this was incorrect. We could certainly do it across if we wanted to, but it reminds us at times as we're putting data on the screen, sometimes we've got a clear idea of what we want to do, other times we change our minds. Always with that idea in the back of our heads, we don't need to retype. We shouldn't need to retype. So let's say we're not going to go down this path, but I think possibly you could see that could be a better way in the long run. But let's focus on a few more visuals here. A lot of the visuals that we see on the Home tab are not critical, and yet they're handy. Without going through all of them, in this worksheet, looks like this already is bold. I did that earlier. You didn't see me do that, but there's B for bold, and I think everybody probably has seen that one time or another. Or italics, underline, probably we wouldn't use there, and so on. These are all on-off, or what we call toggle buttons. By the way, recognize bold and italics sometimes changes the width of the data. But when you apply them to number cells, only the characters get wider. The entire entry does not. Ultimately, that's the same width. And that's because sometimes you might want to have numbers bold in one row but not another, but you still want the decimals and the numbers to line up vertically. So without overkilling and using too many features here, some people might say, well, let's make the pure numbers stand out. Also on the font group here, this is on the Home tab, here's a bucket. If the color that you see on the bucket is what you want, just click it. If you want another color, here's the drop arrow, and tons of choices as you slide over these. You just, for whatever reason, want them to stand out in a certain way, fine. You can highlight other numbers with different colors. Another choice for highlighting data, borders. Do we need borders on those? Probably not. If you want borders on these, well, probably not, but you could do those too. Here's a borders button with tons of choices. Thick border on the outside. Click away from it, just like that. Maybe it would have been better with another kind of border. And almost anybody can explore these at will and use them for this reason or that reason. You run the risk sometimes of too much visual attention on the screen, too many items vying for attention, that idea. So you want to be a little bit judicious about these. Be very careful with font color, particularly when you're dealing with numbers. If you make these red, they're going to be misinterpreted as negatives, perhaps, and you don't want that to happen. Maybe on the text it's okay. Here too, a whole set of choices just to the right of this letter A, font color. And light colors tend not to work so well on a white background, and some of the colors don't stand out very well at all. There's a dark green. I don't think it comes out well. Make it bold. Fine. Tons of choices here. There are alignment choices. I think for the most part you're concerned about this kind of information being right aligned or centered. Do not, even though it looks like you can at times, do not try to center values. Now, depending upon the format, this may have an effect. Other times it doesn't. So it's a bad idea with numbers, unless they happen to be ID numbers. Another format, and certainly not necessary, but if you want to call it flair, that's fine. On the alignment group, this is on the Home tab, there's a slanted AB. You like angle counterclockwise? There we go. You might want to center the data this way, that way, different approaches. This way, I doubt it, although you could. And vertical text, never mind. Although it's there, rotate text up, so on. Tons of choices. And again, if you've got nothing to do while you're on the phone on hold, you might try some of these. There we go. Much of the formatting we do is right here. One other minor point here too. You'll notice on the font group there's a tiny little arrow on the lower right hand corner. You'll see it here on the alignment group, also in the number group right here too. If the feature you're looking for is not available, here's one for example, like strike through. I can't imagine we won't use it here, but if you want to use it, you won't see it here, and it might not be obvious which category it's in, but maybe under font. These little arrows are called dialog box launchers. What they do in all cases is bring up what's called a dialog box like this, and you'll see it here momentarily. And I'm not sure why that isn't responding immediately. Usually comes up right away. And this is reminiscent of the old dialog boxes from Excel 2003. Tons of other choices, not all of which are available in the ribbon menu system. So if somehow you wanted to go to strike through, it's down here. By the way, there's a keystroke shortcut. I did it on an empty cell, shouldn't have. I can't imagine using strike through here, but here's what it would look like. And there is a keystroke shortcut for Control-5, but if you didn't know that, you could go to the font group right here, and there's strike through. There it is. So again, bad idea there. I'll press Control-Z. Now, anytime there's a format issue, one of Excel's great shortcuts, it might not seem like it right now, but it's going to come in real handy at times. For example, the feature you're looking for, you just can't find it up there. You're not sure whether it's font or alignment or number. Anytime you press Control-1, that brings up what's called the Format Cells dialog box. We just saw it a minute ago. There's a number tab with all kinds of formats there, an alignment tab, a font tab, a border tab, and so on and so on. All kinds of choices here. Many of the features found here are on the ribbon, some are not. Control-1 will get you there anytime. All right, I think for formatting that pretty much does it. One more comment about column widths here. At a glance, you might notice column H is wider than the other columns because the number's gone over 1,000. Now you could say, for example, I want all of these columns to be exactly the same width. I'm holding down the left mouse button as I drag across the column here. Simply take the boundary for column H, maybe make it just a little bit wider. All the other columns are going to be exactly the same width. If I want them all to fit the data that's present, I might drag across these and simply double-click there, or any of these boundaries up here. Double-clicking means best fit. In other words, make the column as wide as the widest entry, or let's say make it slightly wider so all data is visible. You'll see that. So column H, as I point to its right edge, says, as I hold down the left mouse button, it's 75 pixels wide. How about column G? 64. Do we worry about that? Never. Or at least I wouldn't. And you probably shouldn't either. We can always adjust column widths. And if I put in a new word down here, I'm not sure why I would have put this here. If I adjust column B to be a best fit, I'm double clicking right here. Try that again. See what happens. Excel analyzes what's in the column and does that. In this case, you might want to override it and so on. So we don't worry about column widths, or let me say that in sort of an editorial sense. Don't worry about column widths. You can easily adjust them. And any time you see pound signs, it could be because the column's too narrow, like that. Sometimes, as you zoom in and out, you'll see pound signs, and at other times you won't. That's kind of confusing. Let me make a couple changes here. Now, possibly as I zoom in and out, we might see pound signs. I'm not seeing any. There they are there. Now, I didn't do anything wrong, and that's just an oddity in Excel. You'll see that happen at times. Don't worry about it. Sometimes just changing the zoom factor adjusts, or if we somehow had to work with these. If we want to adjust all column widths, click in the upper left corner, double-click a boundary between any two letters, and there we are again. Remember, zoom in and out.
Quick question. What about using the paintbrush for a column width?
That's that's ideally used for formatting. Let me make a change here. There is a paintbrush button up here too. It's called Format Painter. Let me first here remove a color, and that's worth mentioning too, by the way. I've got color on these cells, and it's too late to do an undo, but I don't want that color there at all. I want no color. On the Fill Color bucket is a drop arrow. Here are all those choices. And as you slide over them, you see what's happening. But here's a choice called No Fill. Click it. No data. All right, so I'm experimenting here, and I say, I want to give it a color in. Bright yellow. And I want a border. Thick box border. I like that look. Click outside of it. Yeah, that's looking good. And I want a font there, color font, which, by the way, might be a bad idea, but I'll do it. That's sort of a dark blue. Okay. I want it bold. I want it italic. I'll make the column wider. Finally, I say, and maybe I'm weird, but I love that format. I'd like to copy it elsewhere. Here's a button on the Home tab called Format Painter. If I click this once and then click another cell, like here, I've copied the format. Let me undo that. What if I wanted to copy this multiple places? I could double-click Format Painter and say, well, I want to copy it in those two cells, and then out here, and then maybe there and there. Now, it's pretty weird to be doing this, but I can do this indefinitely. See, the paintbrush accompanies the mouse here. If I want to no longer do this, I'll press Escape. So I can certainly do that. Now, let me press some Control-Z's here because that looks very strange. But you can copy to different locations that way. How about another approach? What if I here have made this bold as well? And I like this format. I want to copy it all the way across here. What I could do here is press Format Painter and then simply highlight these cells like this. And so I've copied both sets of formats at the same time. So that's handy, and it's faster than other techniques too. Let me press Control-Z here, because ultimately I really didn't like the format as the way I suggested. But the idea is sometimes you can copy a format. You can also copy a format into adjacent cells, or into an adjacent cell with the right mouse button. So let's say I want this format to be copied. Just one cell to the right, I'll point to its right edge, hold down the right mouse button and drag this into C2. When I let go of the right mouse button, there's the menu. Copy here is formats only. So you can do that as well. So different approaches there for it's called the format painter, and different ideas there too. All right, I think in terms of formatting, that's pretty much it. Remember, you can go astray here. You can get lost in the number of choices as you start thinking about possibly adding colors and borders and that sort of thing. And I think we've all seen some worksheets maybe that was just trying too hard to create impact. There's no question that some worksheets are so formula-laden, we've got to do something to make them stand out, but it could be overkill. Now, I want to pause here just for a second here. Christopher, what I'm going to do now is open a different book, but I want to know if anybody has any questions on any of the things that we've done so far here. Pretty basic stuff for a lot of people, but on the other hand, sometimes it's good to go over some of those basics and remind people about how we do some things in Excel.
You know, not recently and haven't had any questions, but the attentive rating is 95%, which is pretty significant. So they're paying attention. They just don't have any questions at this point.
Okay. I'm going to leave this on the screen here. I am going to save it again. Of course, I can press Control-S or that button in the Quick Access Toolbar. Now, there is a comment about that I want to make because I said I would come back to it. The Quick Access Toolbar, when you initially see it, has about 4 buttons in it, and it's usually above the ribbon. Most people tend to keep it there. You can right-click any of its buttons, and there is an option called Show the Quick Access Toolbar below the ribbon. For some people, this is fine. I use it occasionally this way. Its advantage is that it's closer to the worksheet. Slight disadvantage, you're seeing less of the worksheet, although usually not a whole lot less, maybe a half row or something. So I'm going to put it back in its normal location, which is usually above the ribbon. Now, here's a thought. I'm working with maybe this data or some other data. I'm on the Formulas tab. I'm doing this. Maybe I'm off to the Data tab. I'm using some features here. And I need to do underlining, and I didn't learn the keystroke shortcut. I want to do underlining on these cells or something. Based on what I'm seeing, what do I have to do? I've got to go back to the Home tab. Now, any button, and I do mean any button, that's in the ribbon menu system is a potential candidate for being in the Quick Access Toolbar. So here's that undo button. What I'm going to do is right-click it, and here's the first option, Add to Quick Access Toolbar. There it is. It's going to be there indefinitely until maybe later I decide to take it off. Maybe I'll keep it there for years or a few weeks or whatever. So maybe I'm working with some information on some of the features on the Data tab or Formulas. I want to do my underlining right now. I don't have to go back to the Home tab. It's right there. So I was able to get to it no matter what. And think of other buttons that you might eventually use a lot. Now, if you work with Excel frequently, maybe you find sorting something frequent, something you do often. You work with large lists, you could right-click this button, add it to the Quick Access Toolbar. And at times you'll change your mind. Maybe after a while you say, you know, I can always do Control-U, or come to think of it, I don't use it that often. It doesn't bother me. Let's get rid of it up there. Right-click the button in the Quick Access Toolbar that you no longer need there and say, Remove from Quick Access Toolbar. So you can customize that, and over time, if you're looking at someone else's computer who uses Excel, and they're using Excel at the time, you might see a Quick Access Toolbar with, maybe 50 buttons up there, and different ones than you might have put up there too. Maybe you don't have as many. So feel free to use that, customize it to your own needs. All right, I'm going to open another file. A lot of you have a copy of this. It's called General File. It's kind of a grab bag of features. And as it turns out, I've opened it recently, so I'll just go out here and get to that file. There it is right there. Now, let's face it, a lot of people who use Excel are not creating new information. They're manipulating existing information. Our purpose now is not to go to every single sheet and tell you what this is about, but I've just sent this to you. What do you do first? You look at the bottom of the screen, you start to see these tabs. You're not sure what they all mean. You might click on this one or that one. But a suggestion, number one suggestion, actually You open a workbook you're not familiar with, in the lower left corner you'll see 4 arrows. Right-click. Now what you'll see is a vertical list of those worksheet names. The top-down order that you see here matches the left-to-right order, but you're likely to see more here, depending upon how many sheets you might have. And you can have many, many sheets in certain workbooks. This list at most can show you 16. If you have more than that, you'll see another choice called More Sheets. Now, at the bottom of the screen, we see these same names. Off to the right, eventually we'll see a button out here. Just to the right of the very last one. Now, this is kind of hard to see unless I scroll to the right first maybe, but down here, you'll see a little. If you put the mouse just to the right of the rightmost worksheet that you can see, the mouse pointer becomes a two-way arrow. You can click and drag and move this off to the right. Now, you can move it to the left too, but as you do this, what else is happening? You're shrinking the scroll bar. So depending upon how many worksheets might be there, if you'd like to see all of the names, maybe you got 20 or 25 of them, you might be able to see more of them, at least the names, as you move this pointer left and right. Scroll bar is still off to the right. You can scroll left and right and still use it regardless of how many sheet names you're seeing. So if you were to open, or if you opened this file, if you click on the next one, this is a worksheet, you hope and assume that the person who named these gave some thought to the content of what's in them. Don't always count on that. Here's a list of birthdays. This is the next sheet. These are HR type lists, as if to suggest, well, that's the way some people might use Excel. Lists of data here. Not uncommon. Here's another worksheet. It's a real mess. It's got formulas in it. I might take a look at that a bit later. Here's another worksheet with some examples, maybe financial data. Here's another one, tracking sales of items. Another one, a somewhat bigger worksheet type, suggesting what's going to happen next year based on certain growth patterns. Another one, not unlike what we started with, but maybe expanded. I'll zoom in on it. In no way am I saying that what we're seeing here is a cross-section of the kinds of things in Excel. There's just too many examples. There's another worksheet just comprised of different small lists. Another list has a chart on it. We'll show you a little bit of shortcuts on how to make charts happen really fast. Some people, if they didn't see the chart, the data would not sink in. Suppose the chart wasn't there. You're looking at the data here. Actually, let me move that in. You're looking at the data, it doesn't make sense. Or maybe it probably makes sense, but it's not sinking in the way you might want it to. You're concerned about how your viewers or people in your presentation might be concerned with it. You can easily select this data, and there's a great shortcut, Alt F1, and you'll see a chart just like that. Now, is that the be-all and end-all of presentations? Probably not. But on the other hand, it's an attention getter, and it does bring out the data in a way that maybe is better than just the numbers, at least for some people. And here's a sheet of chart samples, the next sheet over. Here too, not designed to show you all possible chart possibilities, but at least you get some ideas when you see these. And without saying this, I don't want to say it more than I should, creating a lot of these is faster than you would think, faster than you might think. The Excel charting capability has been beefed up. It looks a lot better than it used to, and sometimes these are real attention getters. Now, you will probably never see a worksheet quite like this. This is just a collection of different charts, for the most part, showing pretty much the same data, but in different ways. They're attention getters. Here's a simple line chart. And here's another worksheet that contains a new feature, new in Excel 2010, called Spark Lines. I don't need a full chart. Just give me the quick picture here. Tell me what's been happening over the year here in our regions. Generally an upward trend, some dips, some ups and downs there. We see what's happening by region here. And there are ways to make that look like a column instead. So this is, again, not an attempt to show you all possible things we can do in Excel, but some ideas here.
So Dennis, what about styles when it comes to charts?
There are tons of styles. Let me, in fact, show you here after, as I go to this one worksheet. Let's say we didn't have this one here. I'm going to delete it. The standard way to create a chart is, first of all, to recognize what data do you want to show in a chart. Now, I'm not suggesting, just by what we're seeing here, that charts are only about a small amount of data. It can be a large amount. But if I wanted to show this data in a chart, I wouldn't instinctively know this, but I'd find out pretty quickly. It's not a great idea to show totals and detail together. If one of those totals is 785, the detail is 40. But we do begin charting by selecting the data that we want to show. Now, let's say somebody told me, don't include the totals, so I'm going to highlight this data here. The methodical way, if we don't know a shortcut, it's still pretty fast. The Insert tab in the ribbon. Now, I don't necessarily know, do I want a column chart? Do I want a line chart? A bar chart is almost the same as column, except it's horizontal instead of vertical. Maybe I think that's a better choice, bar. The first one, yeah, let's try that. There's a chart. We can point to its border, move it around. Now that might have been a good choice. I think anytime you create a chart, you might want to consider how it might look otherwise. So on the Design tab, and notice this too, when you create a chart, there are 3 new tabs in the ribbon: Design, Layout, and Format. And you can get bogged down easily here. But the major things you'd want to consider might be change the chart type. And here's about 75 choices. Most people and most charts that you're likely to see are part of what we call the big 4: column, line, pie, bar. Not in that order necessarily, but column charts are pretty common. The first choice is probably a good one. Click it. You can actually double click it. There we go. Could be better. How about line? Change chart type. Here's some line. For line, I always recommend, for starters, the 4th choice in. I wish that were the first one, but line with markers. Those kinds of charts tend to be better if you're showing a trend or hope to show a trend. Maybe we can see pretty clearly here that it's going upward, but we could have seen that maybe in the column as well, too.
I have a question for you, Dennis.
Yes.
Someone asked, once you create a chart, can you delete the other columns, so just show the chart on the page?
Well, you can show a chart on a separate sheet automatically. Simply highlight the data and press F11. I've highlighted this data, F11. We are on a new sheet to the left of the data. The sheet is called Chart 1. It only has a chart on it. It only has a chart on it. Another thing you could do, too, I could take this chart here and copy-paste it onto an empty sheet. You could do that. If you create a chart on its own separate sheet, you could say that we're focused only on the chart as we look at this sheet. No matter where the chart is, whether it's this one here on the separate sheet or this one right next to the data, the chart is in sync with the data at all times. So let's imagine I'm going to change the January domestic total to be, it actually should have been 110, but as I'm typing it, I make a typo. I put in 1100. As soon as I press enter, I know it's a mistake. And what happened on the other sheet? Out there. The chart and the chart data are in sync at all times. Obviously, I want to do an undo there. I'll press Control Z. That was a mistake. But keep in mind, changing this data causes the chart to react. Now, if I had highlighted all the data first and pressed either the shortcut or, remember, it's Alt F1 if you want a chart right here. Oops, F11 if you want it on a separate sheet. But Alt F1, that shows a chart showing total and detail. Now, again, you could, I've heard people say, oh, yeah, I want to see it that way. Well, okay, fine. But I think you can see it's probably not the best chart. We can't see the detail very well because the total is overwhelming. We could, as we look at it too, and with this being highlighted, point to the lower right-hand corner of this data here and drag leftward, and we're seeing it that way. We could also say, go ahead.
What if you did data on both columns, so 2 different scales?
You did, I didn't catch the first part of it.
What if you have a scale on the left and a scale on the right. So the scale on the right would be for total.
With certain kinds of charts, you want yeah, and the data here actually wouldn't be appropriate, and that wouldn't work so well either. I see what you're saying. I don't have a quick example handy, but here's a quick one. What if I have some numbers here, and I'll type in a few of them here. And to make this faster, I'll just highlight these and drag down. Maybe these represent miles per gallon for different cars in our fleet, and trucks and so on. And maybe this is miles driven, so I'll just put in a few of these at the same time. And then I'm just making up numbers as I go here. These are numbers. If we tried to show both of these in the same chart, I'm not sure how that got there. Let's get rid of that. Let's just imagine these, and they're not all bold, and they're not have the same look to them. But maybe these are MPG, and these are miles driven. If you wanted to show both of these in the same chart together, and you press Alt F1, that's pretty apparent that is not a great chart. Now, we're trying to show miles per gallon miles, but when you look at the numbers, you're reminded, well, yeah, it explains why this is, because those are so low. But what you could do here is go to the Layout tab. There's actually a way to select the data that you'd want to change, miles per gallon. And right below it says Format It. And here's an option, Secondary Axis. For the moment, that doesn't look good, but we could, from there, change that to a line chart, just that part of it. Now, is that right? Yeah. The miles per gallon are descending, so let me shake that up a little bit. I'll make that be a 28 there. There we go. And make that be a 17. So let's imagine. So the blue line is miles per gallon, and we're reading that off the right side, and the red is off the left side. So just a reminder. I wouldn't say this is a typical chart, but it is a reminder. Excel has a lot of capability there. The default chart type is the one we see on the right. It's called column, and a lot of people call it bar, but to be specific in Excel, that is a column chart. A bar chart is the same idea in Excel, but it's just 90-degree rotation. For example, this one right here. There we go. That's what Excel calls a bar chart. As soon as you create
another question.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
People are asking, on the chart itself, can you put text and labels on the top or on the left, etc.?
Yes, and here's what I would suggest too. And let me backtrack again. Well, first of all, the point I was about to make here. When you create a chart, you immediately have available on the Design tab up here 48 different choices. I'm not a big fan of these because I can't imagine that too many people want all the bars to be red or all to be green and so on. I usually go down the middle here and pick this one. It's got sort of a 3D look. I kind of like that, but you know, that could be me. It still retains that sort of general look like this. One point to be made here too, on both bar and column, I think they're the type you want to at least take a look at, because sometimes it might be better, is the stacked version. Usually it's the second choice. Here's a stacked column. Simpler and easier to read. The deficiency is, as we're looking at the Asia bars, the green ones, not exactly easy to follow month to month. But on the other hand, when we look at this, we do see, for example, February slightly bigger than March. We can confirm it by the date over there. That brings out the total perhaps a little bit better. But at different times here, let's say, once again, go back to the idea, if we were in a hurry and we wanted to create a chart and get our labels on so that it made sense, highlight the data, press Alt F1 to create a chart right here. It will be a column chart. Let's assume for the moment we like it. What else would you want to have on the chart? The button you want to go to, and it looks weak and it looks gray and not appealing, is called Chart Layouts. Click it, drag arrow. And what you want to get used to, and you don't get a preview here, I usually pick the 9th one if it's notice how the names are real exciting, like Layout 1, Layout 2. Here's Layout 9. I'm going to click it, Watch the chart. It's obvious I don't want that word to be there, but I'll type in my own title, or better yet, click in the formula bar. I'm going to type equal and click cell A1, enter. Just popped in my title. And over here, I'm going to pick up the title from cell A2. Click there, right here on the chart. Click in the formula bar above, equal, click cell A2, enter. Down below, maybe I'll type what I want, or maybe I don't want to type anything, or maybe I'll put in the year. 2014, enter. Something like that. Don't necessarily need that, but so for some people, all set. Everything explained, good. Where you want to be a little bit careful, but nevertheless, you know, you could say it's kind of a boring chart color-wise. Click near the border. That's referred to as the chart area. Go to the Format tab. Here's a drop arrow. Tons of choices. This is the perimeter. If you're an indecisive person, you're in trouble here. Too many choices. Maybe I like that one.
I have a question for you, Dennis.
Yes?
Let's say your label had the quarter or the month or the year in it. Could you actually link the label to a cell on the worksheet?
Yes.
So you don't have to, okay.
That's exactly what I did right here for the title. Let me go back and repeat that part. Let me undo it. Actually, I could backtrack with Control-Z a few times there. Okay, and then Control-Y to reverse direction. Okay, if this says chart title, remember I got here by choosing on the Design tab the chart layout. And after I would have explored, and I have explored in the past, a lot of these, but I like this one because it puts a room for a title on top, left, and bottom, puts in grid lines reasonably. I like it. So I've chosen that. Here's what I get. Chart title. I don't want to type anything. I do want to pick up the data from cell A1. Click in the formula bar. Well, first of all, click chart title. Click in the formula bar, type equal, click cell A1. Enter. If I change, our company's been bought out, we changed our name to Accelerate. Enter. That's what it says on the chart. Title here, like I did before, worldwide sales. That's I've clicked here, click in the formula bar, equal, click cell A2, enter, like that. So you can easily do that. If I want that to be in a border, this would be more than needed. I could go to Format, Shape Styles. I want that to be blue. Outer area, chart area, back to Format tab. I want this look. I should reconsider my other choice. I want that to be its own color, fine. I want the white area in the middle to be different, fine. You know, you can make some bad choices as I'm about to do here probably. Anyway, easy to make changes and to reconsider. Maybe I like that. I don't like this anymore, I'll change it. Maybe just a simple border, whatever. Move it around, so on. The key areas are, I mean, you want to be thinking not so much the color, I think, but, you know, are you getting the point across? Is the chart doing a fair job of expressing the data or showing the data? Is this the best chart type? But it's easy to create. Always in sync with the data, too. Now, another thought here, at a different time, possibly the same worksheet, you want to show domestic, Europe, and Australia, but not Asia. If the chart's already created here, you could simply click one of the Asia columns. Now, Asia is a green column here. I can click one of the green columns. All the green columns are selected. I could just press delete. And it's no longer there. It has no impact on the data, but I just took it off the chart. At other times, you're creating the data from scratch. You're saying, I want this data in the chart. And then with the Control key held down, you highlight this data. You press Alt F1 to get a quick chart. We will not see Asia in this chart. Adjust the chart styles up here maybe. Once again, go to chart layout, pick up this, possibly this, whatever, and go for it. You can easily do that. Sometimes maybe you only want to show one row. How about this? How about a line chart? If you want to create a line chart fast, but not instantly, Data's highlighted, go to Insert. Looks like a line right there. There's a line chart. Don't need the legend there. So, and here's something interesting with line charts. Be alert to this. I'm trying to hide the fact that this is going up. Maybe it's increased absenteeism. I'm the manager. I don't want that to be so dramatic. I'll make it not very tall. It looks like there's change, but not that much. On the other hand, if I'm trying to show profits or sales increasing dramatically, here's saying that it's a lot taller and not very wide. Well, we had a little dip in February, but from then on, fantastic. Great year. Same data as, I'll press Control Z, that Control Y, back and forth. Same data, different story. Be alert to line charts and what you can do with them. Creative distortion, creative enhancement, well, it's your call. Anyway, that's a little more typical perhaps and maybe better, but you'll decide. Line charts are often associated with time frames, and many times you want to consider how they look. Here's another button that's important too. After creating a chart, in here too, I'll press Alt F1 as I have. Remember, default is a column chart. A button here that probably doesn't get your attention, but definitely is an attention getter when you use it. Switch row column. Watch the chart. Now, same data, same number of columns, but obviously a different display. And what we're seeing here is each cluster is now a region. If I click Switch Row Column again, each cluster is a month. So which one is better? You possibly could imagine both of them. Now, if you'd like to duplicate a chart and then maybe change its orientation, and by the way, even though we don't see the word orientation, that's ultimately what this is referred to. Swap the data over the axis. I don't think that's a good tip exactly, but anyway. If you want to copy a chart, you can easily drag a chart either near the border or on the border with the Control key. Let go of the mouse first. I got two charts. Now, pretty obvious I've got a crowded screen here. Here's one chart that I've shrunk. Here's another one. For the moment, they look the same. Let me move the others out of the way. We're getting a little crowded here. Back up here. Two charts looking the same, showing the same data. But the upper one on the right here, I'm going to switch row column. Looks like that. So depending upon who's looking and who's making the presentation, possibly both of these are appropriate. As you resize these, you can drag the corners. You can do it that way. If you're a stickler for detail and you want it to look just so-so, as you're dragging these corners, hold down the Alt key. It will automatically cause the edges to line up with cell boundaries. Click outside of it, you'll see that more prominently, if that's important to you. So anytime you drag a corner or an edge, hold down Alt if you want those edges or corners to line up with cell boundaries. And always let go of the mouse first as you do this, if that's important to you. So tons of different display issues here. Again, there's no question that charts can be an attention getter. They can be abused, let's say, or overused, or sometimes they're used to obscure the data maybe, but they're easy to get to. Now again, without making them too complex, remember, even though there are tons of choices up here, particularly on the Layout tab, which we only went to once, I'd say stay away from these for a while. You might need some of them. There's always that issue about how much fine-tuning do I really need, or maybe how much fine-tuning do I really want to get into. There's a lot of potential time wasting out here. I could make the case for saying this chart, it lacks a title and a few other things. So remember what we suggested, chart layouts? We'll put a title on top, down the side maybe, something like we did before. Do that, add a few colors, looks good to me. What else do we need? Now, you can add free-form text. I think there was a question that sort of suggested that idea. You can do that. On the Insert tab, for example, I mean, you could. Here's a text box. I could, or better yet, maybe start with something else. On the Insert tab here, how about a shape here? Here's an arrow. I could take this arrow and point it to that, and okay, that by itself might be enough, but even that has its own dialog. It has its own tab in the ribbon while it's selected. There's a format tab, and I just got to have it looking like that. And while we're at it, I mean, outline, shape effects, I mean, do I need a shadow for it? Probably not. Does it need a glow? What do you mean a glow? Well, there's a glow, and so on and so on. We could move this up here, drag the other edge, put it here, maybe add a box up here. Now, again, I think you recognize, I don't necessarily want to call it a time waster, but how about putting a text box right here? We'll add some text and bring in another arrow, maybe. So you see where we're heading here. You know, we're going to connect the two maybe somehow like that. And fabulous. You know, great job. And maybe this was done by Jennifer. Jen. Okay. Great. Great job, Jen. Whatever. And why stop there? There's a box. Well, you got formats for the box right there. Okay. And so on. Tons of stuff like that. I wouldn't say that's the be-all and end-all of the visuals, but you can certainly do that. Another thing I want to point out here, too, we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I don't want to suggest that necessarily charts are going to be real important in your job. They could be, depends. But certainly another way that people work with Excel, and some of you will be attending the session on Thursday, a large list, whether it's HR or whether it's inventory, there certainly are going to be times where you want to rearrange this. Now, this particular list has data. And notice here a nice little tip when you're working with data. I'm going to click on one of the cells here, anyone, and double-click the bottom edge. What happens? We zip down to the bottom immediately. Now, I know because I've worked with the data here before that nothing is below this row 699. I can click anywhere down here and double-click the top edge to go back up top. But in any worksheet, it's a good habit to get into. If you're not completely familiar with it or you haven't used it in a while, press Control-End. I'm doing that right now, Control-End. Now, all I can say with authority, and I can say it that way, there is no data in this worksheet anywhere below row 699, nor to the right of column AH. I know that. I can say it convincingly. Anytime you press Control-End, you can be sure there's no data below that or to the right of it anywhere in this worksheet. Usually, but not always, there's data in that row somewhere and in that column. I have to scroll around to find it. Now, all the data here is in one solid chunk. There are no empty rows within it. The headings, the field headings, are in a single row. If I want to rearrange this entire list by employee name, I'll click somewhere in column A. I will not click the column letter. Click somewhere out here. Data tab, although you can also get to it from the Home tab. AZ, ascending order. The entire list is now in order. What happened, and nearly always what happens in sorting, is you rearrange the order of rows within a list. Now, off to the right there could be other data, but the only thing that got rearranged here was this row, that row, they all got moved up or down with amazing speed. I want to see who's been here longest. I want a list of the people who have been here longest. I'll click somewhere in column G, sort ZA, descending order. Actually, those people are here the least. I'll do it the other way, AZ. In this list, Greg Sanchez has been here the longest, August 9th of 93, 21 years. So who gets paid the most? I'll click out in column J somewhere, ZA. And what is this company spending on compensation? I'll click column J. Remember that status bar. Look at the bottom, 47 million. That's what they're spending. Average salary here, or average compensation, 67. That's kind of misleading because we've got contract people. Boy, some of them get paid pretty well. Contract people, full-time, later, we'll see half-time, perhaps some other kinds of status as well here. But we can easily rearrange this data quickly. Excel also has ways for sorting data by color. A bit later, you might learn about conditional formatting. Based on the numbers, we see different symbols here. The salaries here, the higher salaries have green arrows, the lower salaries have red arrows. Years of service, they're highlighted based on the value. tons of things we can do here. Anytime we're looking at hire dates, we want to know the years of service. These are even, by way of a special formula here, they're being updated, and they're always accurate to the day because they use a special function called today, which really uses, for example, November 4th, 2014. This is always accurate, in the same way that we would calculate possibly birth dates. So they're amazing tools here. These, of course, make the data stand out, jump out at any time. Our ability to rearrange them is easy. And also, if we want to see just a section of this list, we could do this with our other list too, at any time. Filter, an easy-to-use feature. It hides the data we don't want to see. For example, we only want to see people who are full-time here. Status, all the boxes are checked. Let's just check full-time. So 379 people here are full-time, and we only want to see our top performers. There's job rating, drop arrow. Let's just see the 5s. We are not in any way destroying the data. We're just hiding what we don't want to see. 96 people are full-time, and they also have that job rating of 5, which is best. And we can narrow down by years and other fields as well, too. The blue row numbers off to the left remind us we're not seeing everything. Sorting and filtering, easy-to-use features. There's more depth to them. We haven't seen everything there, but and there's a special advanced filter, too. So I think that's probably enough for sort of a refresher. I hope we focused on features that most people were interested in or needed some review in. If there's something we overlooked, possibly we could cover it now, or if you got a question, now's the time.
Yes, does anyone have a question? If so, please type it in. Also, after the question you think about, you can email Christopher@excelandaccess.com and Dennis@excelandaccess.com, and we'll try to answer those for you. Those email addresses are in the webinar information as well as in the chat window here. Anybody have any questions? And I will be uploading this video for Drew to see, and then we'll possibly edit and make it available to you as well.
Let me do mention, I did mention the one keystroke shortcut here, and here's a possible use for it. Let's imagine that when people leave this organization, we don't necessarily remove their names from them. If we indicate, at least for a while, that they've left by strike-through. You remember earlier I did use that keystroke shortcut called Control-5. At other times in certain worksheets, maybe here's a worksheet. If you want to put in today's date at any time, you can always press Control-semicolon. That'll put in today's date at any time. Control-semicolon. It's always accurate. It works off of your system clock. It's just a shortcut for typing the date. And if you are putting in date series too, it doesn't necessarily have to be today's date, but if any date that you put in Excel, for example this one, if you drag from the lower right-hand corner, you're going to get next day, next day, next day, from now until whenever. And if you wanted to put in, for example, a bunch of Tuesdays, if that's the 4th and the next week is the 11th, if you highlight both of those, remember those are 2 Tuesdays, and drag downward, here's your list of Tuesdays from now until whenever. I'll use the current font here too. So we can easily create series here with dates. And so that's a handy feature as well too. Dragging across, we get the same kind of situation too. So there are lots of shortcuts related to putting in date entries here.
Dennis, do you ever use the F4 key?
The F4 key can be used for absolute addressing. We'll certainly get into that. We'll mention that in Friday's session. It didn't come up in today's. You can also use it for repeat. For example, if I make these cells here yellow, and then I highlight these, if I press F4, it'll make those yellow too. And if I highlight these and press F4, those will be yellow. And so, in other words, you can repeat an action with the F4 key.
So if you insert a row and you hit the F4 key 5 times, you're going to get 5 more rows?
That's right. So if I right-click and insert right there, if I click here and press F4, click there and press F4, and here and so on. I'm just pressing F4 each time. What I do. So you can do that too.
Anything else you'd like to do with them today before we end the
Again, if I've overlooked something, would you possibly throw it into the remaining two sessions, because many of the people who are here today are going to be in the next two as well. So if there's something we overlooked, and also just for future examples too, if we spent too much time in the very beginning, let us know. I thought it was necessary to go over that, but since we didn't get any questions, I sometimes am a little concerned that maybe we covered it too basic, but still, let us know.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending today, and we'll see a lot of you on Thursday, and we also have a webinar on Friday as well. So if you have any questions, please email us, or if you don't have our contact information, please just send it to Drew, and Drew is going to reach out to each of you and get your feedback to see how we did today and how we can do on Thursday and Friday. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dennis, for the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.